Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. The air in Gehenna Correctional Facility tasted of recycled oxygen and cold stone. Kalen breathed it in, a familiar staleness that had long ago replaced the memory of open sky. For 5 years, this had been his world, a labyrinth of gray corridors bored into the heart of a dead moon, a place where the only currency was obedience, and the only future was the next shift change. He was a corrections officer, 3rd class, a title that meant he was just another cog in a machine designed to contain the forgotten dregs of the corporate hegemony. His patrol route was an unvarying circuit through Sector Gamma, the deepest and most silent part of the facility. Here, the standard cell blocks gave way to heavy-duty containment units, their meter-thick plasteel doors humming with the low thrum of suppression fields. Kalen's boots echoed on the grated floor, a solitary rhythm against the ever-present drone of the life support systems. He carried his pulse rifle with the practiced ease of a man for whom the weapon was an extension of his own weary limbs. He had carried one for 20 years, first in the hegemony's colonial marines, now here. The targets had changed, but the feeling of the cold stock against his shoulder had not. He passed cell 717, its occupant a hulking Kthar warlord who had once conquered 3-star systems. Now, he sat in the dim light, staring at a wall, his 4 powerful arms limp at his sides. Kalen didn't look at him. He never looked at them. They were cargo, inventory, numbers on a manifest. To see them as anything more was a weakness, a crack in the armor of indifference he wore like a second skin. Survival in a place like this depended on such armor. The final checkpoint of his route was different. It was a single, massive blast door at the end of a long, isolated tunnel, designated only as Containment 0. No number, no name. The official record listed it as housing geological survey equipment. Kalen knew this was a lie. Everyone knew it was a lie, but it was a lie sanctioned by Warden Valerius, and therefore it was truth. The guards who had asked too many questions in the past had simply disappeared from the duty roster. His duty at Containment 0 was simple: stand guard for 2 hours, report any fluctuations in the energy readings on the adjacent console, and speak to no one. The energy radiating from the door was immense, a silent pressure that made the fillings in his teeth ache and the hair on his arms stand on end. Whatever was inside, it was powerful, and the systems holding it were strained to their absolute limit. He checked the console. All indicators were in the green, hovering just below the red line, as they always were. A flicker. The lights overhead strobed once, twice, and then returned to their steady, sterile glow. Kalen's head snapped up. Power fluctuations were not uncommon in the aging facility, but they always made him uneasy. He glanced at the console. A single amber light blinked, indicating a momentary dip in the primary containment field. It stabilized almost immediately, returning to green, but not before a sound reached him from behind the door. It was not a roar or a cry of anger. It was a low, resonant hum, a vibration that seemed to travel through the stone floor and up into his bones. It sounded like pain. It sounded ancient and deeply alone. For the first time in years, a feeling other than weary resignation stirred within him. It was a ghost of a sensation, an echo of a man he used to be. He recognized it as curiosity, a dangerous and unwelcome intruder. He stepped closer to the door, his hand resting on the cold metal. The humming intensified, not in volume, but in complexity. It was a tapestry of sound, intricate and sorrowful. Protocol was clear: report the fluctuation and step away. His hand went to the comms unit on his shoulder, his thumb hovering over the activation stud. He thought of the report he would file, the board technician who would log it, and Warden Valerius, who would read it with his cold, dismissive eyes. Nothing would be done. He did not press the button. Instead, he found himself thinking of a small object in his pocket. On a rare surface detail, scouting for seismic instability near a new mining shaft, he had found it. A shard of quartz, no bigger than his thumb, but perfectly clear, its facets catching the dim light of Gehenna's distant sun in a way that seemed almost alive. It was a useless, sentimental thing, a small piece of beauty in an ugly world. He had kept it for reasons he could not articulate. On the console next to the door was a small maintenance port, a diagnostic access point for the nutrient and energy feeds that sustained whatever was inside. It was strictly forbidden to access it. Tampering with Containment Zero was an offense punishable by summary execution. Kalen looked down the empty corridor. He was alone. The surveillance cameras in this sector had been malfunctioning for a month, another sign of the facility's slow decay. He did not know why he did it. It was not a conscious decision, but an impulse, a rebellion against the gray monotony of his existence. He opened the access port. A wave of cool, ionized air washed over him. Inside was a small receptacle, a port for data chips and diagnostic tools. The low, pained hum from within the cell grew stronger, more focused, as if it sensed the opening. Kalen took the quartz shard from his pocket. It felt cool against his skin. He hesitated for only a second, then placed the crystal into the receptacle. It was not a key. It was not a tool. It was just a rock. It should have done nothing. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The humming from within the cell did not stop. It changed. The note of pain vanished, replaced by a soaring, harmonic chime that vibrated through the entire sector. The console beside him lit up like a supernova, every light flashing from green to blood red. A wave of pure energy, white and blinding, erupted from the access port, throwing Kalen back against the far wall. His rifle clattered to the floor. Alarms blared to life across the facility, their screeching klaxons a chorus of synthetic panic. Red emergency lights bathed the corridor in a hellish glow. He had not just broken protocol. He had shattered it. The energy wave had overloaded the local grid, but it had done something else. It had acted like a key, a resonant frequency that had spoken to the prisoner inside in a language the suppression fields did not understand. From behind the blast door, a new light began to glow, a brilliant blue that pulsed in time with the harmonic chime. The thick plasteel began to groan, the metal stressed from within by a power it was no longer equipped to contain. Kalen pushed himself to his feet, his ears ringing. He knew he was a dead man. Whatever he had just done, there was no coming back from it. His comms unit crackled. All units, Sector Gamma, Containment Zero. Code Black. I repeat, Code Black. Hostile entity breach imminent. Lethal force authorized. The voice was cold, precise, and belonged to Officer Core, the warden's fanatical right hand. Kalen grabbed his rifle. His training, his instinct for survival, screamed at him to run, to get as far away from this epicenter of chaos as he could. But where could he go? He was on a sealed moon, in the deepest part of a maximum security prison. There was no escape. He looked at the groaning door, the pulsing blue light. He had caused this. He had poked the sleeping god. Heavy footsteps echoed from down the corridor, the rhythmic tramp of armored boots. Core's team. They would shoot him on sight, and then try to deal with whatever was in the cell. A cold certainty settled in Kalen's gut. His old life was over, measured in the few seconds it took for him to place a worthless crystal into a forbidden port. His new life would be measured in minutes. The blast door buckled, a long, screeching tear appearing down its center. The blue light within flared, pouring through the crack like liquid starlight. Kalen made a choice. It was not a choice for a cause, or for another person. It was a choice for himself, a final act of defiance against the gray, suffocating world that had tried to grind him into dust. He was not going to die on his knees waiting for Core's judgment. He turned to the door's emergency release console. It was locked down, but he knew the overrides. He had studied the schematics of this place, not out of diligence, but out of a soldier's ingrained need to know his terrain. He typed in the command sequence. The console flashed, access denied. Warden level clearance required. He slammed his fist against it, then paused. There was another way. A physical bypass, meant for catastrophic systems failure. It would blow every circuit breaker in the sector, but it would open the door. He ripped a panel from the wall, exposing a tangle of conduits. Behind him, Core's team rounded the far corner, their helmet-mounted lights cutting through the strobing red of the emergency beacons. Kalen, stand down. On your knees. Core's voice boomed over the klaxons. Kalen ignored him. He found the two main power conduits and, using the butt of his rifle, smashed the junction between them. A shower of sparks erupted, and the entire corridor plunged into darkness, the alarms and emergency lights dying with a final, choked gasp. Only the ethereal blue light from the fractured door remained. With a final, deafening groan, the magnetic locks failed. The two halves of the massive door slid open. For a moment, all was silent. Kalen stood, silhouetted against the impossible light pouring from the cell. He turned, raising his rifle not at Core, but at the figure that emerged from within. It was not a monster. It was a woman, or something that wore a woman's form. She was tall, impossibly slender, her body composed not of flesh, but of woven light and living crystal. Her face was serene, her eyes 2 points of soft, white incandescence. She was a being of profound power and terrible beauty. This was Lyra. She took a step out of her prison, and the floor beneath her feet crackled with nascent energy. She looked at Kalen, not with anger, but with an expression of deep, ancient weariness. And something else. Recognition. She looked past him, at the squad of armored guards now frozen in shock and awe. Open fire. Core screamed, breaking the spell. The corridor erupted in a storm of pulse rifle fire. The bolts of plasma sizzled through the air, converging on her. Kalen braced for her destruction, but Lyra simply raised a hand. A shield of pure force, shimmering like heat haze, materialized around her, absorbing the volley with barely a ripple. The energy bolts dissipated against it, harmless. She turned her gaze back to Kalen. It was an unnerving experience, to be looked at by something so alien. He felt a gentle pressure in his mind, not words, but a feeling, a mixture of gratitude and a question. What? He had no answer. He acted on instinct. He grabbed her arm. It was not solid, not flesh, but felt like touching a powerful magnetic field, a strange combination of resistance and yielding. This way, he grunted, pulling her away from the guards and down a dark service tunnel he knew led to the prison's underbelly. She moved with him, her steps silent and graceful. Behind them, Core was shouting orders, trying to rally his stunned men. Seal the sector. Do not let them escape. Kalen and Lyra plunged into the darkness of the maintenance corridors. The air here was thick with the smell of ozone and machine oil. Pipes crisscrossed the low ceiling, dripping with foul condensation. It was a world away from the sterile environment of the main prison. It was the facility's guts, a place where he could lose their pursuers. He had no plan beyond immediate survival. He was now an escaped convict and a traitor, allied with an unknown entity of immense power. The thought was so absurd it almost made him laugh. He was running on pure adrenaline, his soldier's mind taking over, assessing threats, choosing paths, moving toward the path of least resistance. Lyra followed without question. She seemed disoriented, her inner light flickering slightly, as if the transition from her long confinement to the chaotic reality of the escape was taking its toll. She was powerful, yes, but he could sense a fragility about her, a vulnerability that the guards' pulse rifles could not touch. They reached a junction. Kalen paused, listening. He could hear the distant clang of blast doors sealing, the shouts of guards echoing through the maze of tunnels. They were boxing him in. He chose a smaller, narrower conduit, one barely large enough for a man to crawl through. Here, he said, more to himself than to her. As he pushed aside the rusted grate, a section of the ceiling behind them exploded inward. Core and 2 of his guards dropped through the hole, landing with the heavy thud of mag boots on metal. Their helmet lights pinned Kalen and Lyra in their beams. Nowhere left to run. Traitor, Core snarled, raising his rifle. Kalen shoved Lyra toward the conduit and raised his own weapon, laying down a short burst of suppressing fire. The plasma bolts spattered against the guards' armor, forcing them to take cover. It wouldn't hold them for long. Go. Get through, he yelled. Lyra hesitated, her luminous eyes fixed on him. She saw the grim resolve in his face, the acceptance of his fate. He was buying her time, a few precious seconds, with his own life. She turned not to the conduit, but to the guards. She extended her hand, and a wave of kinetic force, invisible and silent, slammed into Core and his men. It was not a blast of energy, but a precise, crushing pressure. The guards were thrown back against the far wall like dolls, their armor groaning under the strain. They crumpled to the floor, stunned and immobile. Kalen stared, momentarily speechless. She had neutralized them without killing them, an act of restraint that seemed completely alien in this place of casual brutality. But the effort had cost her. Her light dimmed significantly, and she staggered, leaning against the wall for support. The entire tunnel shuddered. A deep, grinding roar echoed from above. Kor, recovering faster than his men, had activated a failsafe. A massive hydraulic press used for waste disposal was descending, threatening to crush the entire section of the corridor. If I can't have the asset, no one will. His voice crackled over Kalen's stolen comm unit. Debris rained down from the ceiling. A heavy support beam broke free and fell directly toward the weakened Lyra. Kalen reacted without thinking. He lunged, tackling her and pushing them both into the relative safety of a small alcove. The beam crashed down where she had been standing, shattering the floor plating. He was on top of her, shielding her from the falling dust and rock with his own body. The proximity was strange. He could feel the low thrum of her energy, a steady, rhythmic pulse like a heartbeat. He looked down at her. Her eyes were closed, her light faint but steady. They were trapped, the ceiling groaning above them. The path ahead blocked by the descending press, the path behind by Kor. This was the moment their alliance was forged. Not in words, but in action. She had saved him from Kor's men. He had saved her from the falling debris. A silent contract of mutual protection, signed in the midst of chaos and destruction. He pushed himself off her, his mind racing. The press is slow, he muttered. We can get under it if we move now. She opened her eyes and looked at him. A single, clear image bloomed in his mind. A schematic of the tunnel system, with a route highlighted in blue light, leading downward, toward the moon's deep mining shafts. It was a path he had not known existed. She was showing him the way. He nodded, a sharp, quick gesture of understanding. All right, let's go. He helped her to her feet. She was still weak, leaning on him for support. Together, they scrambled out of the alcove and ran, hunched over, under the groaning, descending slab of metal. They made it through with seconds to spare, the press slamming shut behind them with a cataclysmic boom that shook the very foundations of the prison. They were in the old mining tunnels now, a part of the moon that had been abandoned for decades. The air was thin and cold, filled with the dust of ages. The only light came from Lyra herself, a soft, ethereal glow that pushed back the oppressive darkness. They were free from the immediate pursuit, but they were now fugitives in a vast, subterranean wasteland. Their journey through the forgotten depths of Gehenna was a silent ordeal. The tunnels were a treacherous maze, some flooded with stagnant, mineral-heavy water, others prone to sudden collapse. The moon groaned around them, a constant, low tremor that spoke of a deep and ancient instability. For days, they walked, Kalen using his survival skills to navigate the treacherous environment, Lyra providing the light, and, through her mental projections, a map of the labyrinthine network. He learned to read her light. When it was bright and steady, she was strong. When it flickered and dimmed, she was growing weak. He found that the moon itself seemed to drain her, the very rock absorbing her energy. He scavenged for power packs from derelict mining equipment, rigging them to emit a low-level energy field that seemed to sustain her, if only for a little while. It was a crude substitute for the complex systems of her cell, but it was enough. Their communication evolved beyond simple maps. She began to show him images, fragments of memory. He saw glimpses of a star-filled void, of worlds made of crystal and light, of a civilization far older than the hegemony. He saw her arrival on Gehenna, not as a prisoner, but as a willing custodian. She had come to quiet the moon, to act as a keystone to balance its violent geothermal energies. One night, while resting in a vast, silent cavern filled with towering salt pillars, she showed him the truth. The image filled his mind with a clarity that was more real than reality. He saw the first human prospectors arriving, the establishment of the prison as a cover for their true operation. He saw Warden Valerius, younger then, overseeing the construction of the siphoning device that became her prison. They were not just containing her. They were draining her, using her life force to agitate the moon's core, deliberately inducing seismic events to bring rare and valuable minerals to the surface. The prison was a mine, and she was its unwilling engine. The revelation settled in Kalen's soul like a block of ice. The cynicism he had cultivated for years was not enough to protect him from the sheer, calculated evil of it. He had been a guard, a warden of a single prisoner, who was herself the warden of the entire moon. He had been a part of a monstrous injustice. He finally had a cause, but it was a cause born of shame and a burning, unfamiliar anger. He looked at Lyra, who sat across the small fire he had managed to build from scavenged chemical heating elements. Her light was soft, her form relaxed. She seemed to be studying him, her head tilted slightly. In the flickering firelight, he unsealed the top of his worn combat fatigues. He pulled the fabric aside, revealing the scarred, burnished skin of his shoulder and chest, a permanent reminder of the plasma explosion that had ended his military career. The ambush, the betrayal by his commanding officer who had written his unit off as an acceptable loss. He had been left for dead. He had never shown the scars to anyone. They were a map of his failure, of his broken trust in the systems he had once served. He did not know why he showed them to her. Perhaps it was a confession, a way of saying, "I understand being used. I understand being left behind." In response, Lyra held out her arm. The crystalline structure of her hand shifted, becoming momentarily transparent. Kaelin could see, deep within her form, a network of dark, spiderweb-like lines, fractures in her luminous essence. They pulsed with a faint, sickly black light. It was the damage from the siphon, a wound that went to the very core of her being. It was her own scar, a testament to her long and silent suffering. In that moment of shared vulnerability, the last of the walls between them crumbled. He was no longer just her protector, and she was no longer just his ticket to survival. They were allies, bound by a shared history of pain and betrayal at the hands of the same corrupt power. He reached out and, for the first time, touched her hand not out of necessity, but out of a simple, human gesture of comfort. Her light warmed slightly at his touch. They finally emerged onto the surface, clawing their way out of a collapsed mining shaft onto a windswept, desolate plain. The sky of Gehenna was a bruised purple, choked with dust, with the distant, swirling gas giant the moon orbited hanging like a single, baleful eye. The air was thin and tasted of sulfur. It was a hostile, dying world. Their reprieve was short-lived. On the horizon, a plume of dust rose against the sky. A transport, moving fast. Kaelin pulled Lyra behind a rocky outcropping, his hand instinctively going to the rifle slung over his back. He pulled a pair of magnoculars from his pack. It was a Hegemony Marauder-class patrol craft, heavily armed. And behind it, two more. "Core," Kaelin breathed. The man was relentless. Valerius must have promised him a significant reward to pursue them onto the unstable surface. The patrol craft fanned out, their searchlights cutting through the gloom. It was clear they were not just searching, they were hunting. A voice, amplified and distorted, boomed across the wasteland. "Kaelin, surrender the asset. The warden is prepared to be merciful." Kaelin scoffed. Valerius's mercy was a quick death instead of a slow one. He looked at Lyra. Her light was brighter now, out from under the oppressive weight of the moon's crust, but she was still weak. A direct confrontation was suicide. They began to move, using the canyons and ravines that crisscrossed the landscape for cover. It was a desperate chase. The marauders were faster, their sensors sweeping the terrain. Several times, they were nearly spotted, forced to press themselves into the shadows of cliffs as the ships roared overhead. Core was a skilled hunter. He seemed to anticipate their movements, cutting off their escape routes, forcing them deeper into a region of the moon known as the Shattered Fields, an area notorious for its extreme seismic instability. It was a trap. They were finally cornered in a deep, box canyon. The three marauders descended, landing in a semicircle at the canyon's mouth, their cannons aimed directly at their position. Ramps lowered, and squads of heavily armed guards disembarked, advancing in a disciplined formation. Core stood in the center, his polished black armor a stark contrast to the red dust of the moon. "It's over, traitor," Core's voice echoed off the canyon walls. "Give her up. You have no idea what you are interfering with." "I know exactly what I'm interfering with," Kaelin shouted back, his voice raw. "I know what you're doing to this moon." To her. Core laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You know nothing. You were a glorified key turner. This is about progress, about power. She is a tool, and you are a malfunction." Lyra stepped forward, moving past Kaelin. Her light began to intensify, a brilliant, defiant silver. The ground around her feet began to hum. Kaelin knew what was coming. She was gathering her strength for another attack, but he could see the strain it was putting on her. Her fractured core pulsed erratically. To use her power now, in her weakened state, could destroy her. "Don't," he said, putting a hand on her shoulder. "You're too weak." She looked at him, and he felt a wave of cold resolve from her. There is no other way. Before she could act, the ground beneath them lurched violently. It was not a tremor, it was a convulsion. A massive earthquake, stronger than any Kalen had ever experienced, tore through the canyon. The rock walls fractured, and the sky filled with dust. The guards stumbled, their disciplined formation breaking. A new image flooded Kalen's mind, a frantic, desperate message from Lyra. It was Valerius. Without Lyra to act as a damper, he had pushed the siphon at the prison into critical overload. He was deliberately trying to fracture the moon's crust, to release a massive vein of minerals he had detected deep below. He was sacrificing the entire moon and the nearby orbital colony of 50,000 people for a final, massive payday. The scale of Valerius's greed was breathtaking. This was no longer just a hunt. It was an impending apocalypse. They could not win this fight. Even if Lyra destroyed Kor and his men, Valerius would still shatter the moon. A direct military victory was impossible. Their small rebellion was meaningless in the face of such overwhelming, destructive power. As the ground continued to heave, another piece of information flowed from Lyra into Kalen's consciousness. It was a schematic, not of the prison, but of the moon itself. It showed the siphoning device, a parasitic machine latched onto the moon's core, and it showed a way to stop it. The keystone, the entity that balanced the moon, did not have to be one of her kind. The ancient technology that focused the balancing energy was designed to interface with a complex consciousness. It could be stabilized by another sentient being. A human nervous system, with its intricate web of synaptic connections, could, in theory, be adapted to serve the same function. The process would be irreversible. The individual would have to physically merge with the core interface, their consciousness expanding to become one with the moon. They would cease to be human, becoming a silent, eternal guardian, their mind the force that held the world together. They would be a prisoner in their own body, a living seal for an entire world, forever. The impossible choice was laid bare before him. To save the moon, to save the colony, to save her, someone had to make the ultimate sacrifice. Someone had to become the new keystone. Kalen looked at the chaos around him. Kor's men were trying to retreat to their ships as the canyon collapsed around them. He looked at Lyra, her light a beacon of fragile hope in the swirling dust. He looked at his own hands, calloused and scarred from a life of fighting other people's wars. He had lived a life of duty without purpose, of survival without meaning. He was cynical, broken, and alone. What was the value of such a life, measured against 50,000 others? The internal conflict was a silent, raging storm. His every instinct, honed over decades of self-preservation, screamed at him to find another way, to run, to survive. That was the code he had lived by. But his journey with Lyra, the trust she had placed in him, the truth she had shown him, had unearthed something he thought long dead, a sense of honor, a desire for his life to mean something more than just its continuation. He remembered the faces of the colonists he had seen on news feeds, families, children, oblivious to the fact that the ground beneath their feet was about to be torn apart by one man's greed. He thought of Lyra, finally free after centuries of torment, only to see her world destroyed and her sacrifice rendered meaningless. His decision solidified, not with a clash of thunder, but with a quiet, solemn acceptance. It felt less like a choice and more like an inevitability, the final, logical step on a path he had started when he placed a crystal into a maintenance port. He had started this. It was his duty to finish it. He turned to Lyra, the dust and chaos swirling around them. The ground had momentarily stabilized, a brief calm in the heart of the storm. He met her incandescent gaze. He had no words to explain his decision. How could he? Instead, he simply reached out and placed his palm against the side of her face. The contact was warm, a current of understanding passing between them. He projected his own thoughts toward her, clumsily, without her grace. He showed her his resolve, his acceptance of the price. He showed her his hope for her future, a future free from her prison, a future where she was no longer a tool. A profound sadness emanated from her, a sorrow so deep it felt like a physical weight. But beneath it, there was respect. She did not try to dissuade him. She understood sacrifice. She had lived it for centuries. She inclined her head, a gesture of solemn agreement, her light pulsing once, a silent, sorrowful farewell. "We have to go back," Kalen said, his voice steady. "Back to Containment Zero. The interface must be there." Lyra nodded. She raised her hands, and the ground in front of them shifted. A fissure opened, not a violent crack, but a smooth, deliberate parting of the rock, revealing a tunnel leading steeply down into the planet's depths. It was a direct path, a shortcut back to the prison's core. Core, seeing them about to escape, bellowed in rage. He fired a signal flare. One of the marauders, its engine screaming, lifted off and turned its main cannon toward them. A blinding light began to build at the weapon's tip. Lyra acted. She threw up a shimmering wall of force, not to protect them, but to redirect. The cannon fired, a massive bolt of pure plasma. It struck the shield and, instead of dissipating, was deflected upward, carving a molten path up the side of the canyon wall. The entire cliff face gave way, a colossal avalanche of rock that crashed down upon the remaining two ships and Core's position, burying them completely. The last marauder, its cannon still smoking, hovered for a moment, its pilot clearly stunned. Then, as another violent tremor shook the ship, it turned and fled, ascending rapidly into the dust-choked sky. They were alone. "Let's finish this," Kalen said, and together, they descended into the darkness. The journey back was a desperate race against time. The moon was dying around them. The tunnel they traveled groaning and shifting, threatening to collapse at any moment. They emerged back into the prison's lowest levels, in the chamber of Containment Zero. The blast doors were still open, the room beyond a mess of shattered equipment and scorch marks. In the center of the cell, where Lyra had been held, the floor had retracted, revealing a spiral staircase descending into a vast, spherical chamber below. This was the heart of the facility, the true purpose of its construction. The chamber was filled with a colossal machine of unknown origin, an intricate lattice of crystal and metal that hummed with terrifying power. This was the siphon, and at its center was a single, throne-like chair, surrounded by a halo of crackling energy conduits. The core interface. Standing before it, his back to them, was Warden Valerius. He was not wearing a uniform, but a complex environmental suit, clearly prepared to ride out the moon's destruction from this shielded chamber. He turned as they entered. His face, visible through his helmet's visor, was a mask of cold fury. "You," he hissed, his eyes fixing on Lyra. "The asset returns. And you brought my malfunctioning guard with you." "It's over, Valerius," Kalen said, leveling his rifle. "Shut it down." Valerius laughed. "Shut it down? You fool. I'm on the verge of the greatest discovery in corporate history. When the crust fractures, the core will yield materials beyond imagining. I will be a king. You'll be the king of a graveyard," Kalen retorted. A small price to pay, Valerius touched a control on his wrist. From the shadows of the chamber, for heavily armed security, drones glided forward, their optical sensors glowing red. "I was going to let you die with the rest of this rock. Now, I'll have the pleasure of watching you be disassembled first." The drones opened fire. Lyra moved like lightning, a blur of silver light. She intercepted the plasma bolts with shimmering shields of force, her body a whirlwind of defensive energy. She was protecting him, giving him the opening he needed. Kalen didn't hesitate. He broke from cover, sprinting toward the central interface, his rifle firing in short, controlled bursts. He took out one drone, then a second, but the remaining two focused their fire on him. He dove behind a console as a volley of plasma bolts slagged the spot where he had been. He was pinned down. He could see Valerius at the main console, preparing to engage the siphon's final, catastrophic sequence. He had to reach that chair. He looked over at Lyra. She was weaving a complex web of energy, containing the drones, but he could see her light flickering, the strain of the prolonged fight wearing her down. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the stairwell. It was Core. His armor was battered and covered in dust, but he was alive, his face a snarl of pure hatred. He held a vibro-knife in one hand, its blade humming. He had survived the rock slide and followed them. "Kalen," he roared, ignoring the drones, ignoring Valerius. His obsession focused entirely on the man he saw as the source of his humiliation. He charged. Kalen met the charge head-on. There was no room for range combat. It was brutal and close. He parried the knife with the stock of his rifle, the impact jarring his arms. Kor was stronger, fueled by a fanatic's rage. He pressed his attack, the humming blade slashing through the air, forcing Kalen back step by step, closer to the edge of the platform. They grappled, two men locked in a primal struggle for dominance. Kor's knife sliced across Kalen's arm, drawing blood. Kalen grunted in pain but used the momentum to slam his forehead into Kor's helmet, cracking the visor. He shoved Kor back and kicked his leg out from under him. The man fell, but rolled and came up slashing, the vibro knife tearing a gash in Kalen's side. Pain exploded through Kalen's body, but his mind was clear, focused. He knew he was running out of time. As Kor lunged again, Kalen dropped his rifle, sidestepped, and caught Kor's wrist, twisting it with all his strength. The bone snapped with a sickening crack. Kor screamed, the knife falling from his nerveless fingers. Kalen drove his fist into the man's throat, then shoved him hard. Kor stumbled backward, his eyes wide with shock, and fell over the edge of the platform into the humming energy field of the siphon below. There was a brief, violent flash of light, and then he was gone, utterly consumed. Kalen swayed on his feet, clutching his wounded side. He looked up. Lyra had dispatched the last two drones, but she was kneeling now, her light a pale, fragile shimmer. Valerius, seeing his last line of defense gone, made a desperate move. He activated the final sequence. A klaxon began to sound, and the energy field around the interface chair intensified. "You are too late," Valerius screamed, a mad triumph in his voice. "The sequence is irreversible. This moon is mine." Kalen pushed himself forward, blood leaving a trail on the floor. He limped toward the chair, his vision starting to blur at the edges. He had to get to it. He had to interface. Valerius drew a sidearm, a heavy-bore energy pistol, and fired. The bolt caught Kalen in the leg. His knee buckled, and he fell to the floor, crying out in pain. He tried to crawl forward, his fingers stretching toward the base of the chair. Lyra rose. With a final, desperate surge of power, she unleashed a focused beam of light that struck the console Valerius was standing at. The machine exploded, throwing the warden across the room, his suit breached and failing. He lay broken amidst the wreckage. Kalen dragged himself the last few feet. He pulled himself up into the interface chair. The moment his body made contact, the world dissolved. Pain, white and absolute, seared through every nerve in his body. The energy conduits connected, not just to the chair, but to him. He felt the raw, chaotic energy of the moon's core pour into his consciousness. His mind, his very being, was torn apart and stretched thin. He was no longer a man in a chair. He was the rock, the magma, the dust. His awareness expanded at the speed of light, filling every crack and crevice of the moon. He felt the strain of the tectonic plates, the violent pressure of the overheating core, the parasitic drain of the siphon. And he pushed back. With a thought that was no longer human, he seized control of the moon's geothermal energies. He did not fight them, he soothed them. He imposed order on the chaos, balance on the instability. He became the keystone. From the core of Gehenna, a single, massive pulse of calming energy emanated, spreading through the planet in a silent, unstoppable wave. On the surface, the earthquake stopped. The fracturing crust settled. The violent winds died down to a whisper. In the control chamber, the siphon, denied its chaotic energy source and overloaded by the placating pulse, sputtered and died. Its crystal lattice shattered, and the entire machine went dark, its malevolent hum silenced forever. The war was over, not with a bang, but with a profound and sudden peace. 10 years passed. Gehenna was no longer a dead moon. The stabilization of its core had altered its geology, releasing trapped water vapor and dormant atmospheric gases. A thin, breathable atmosphere had formed. Hardy, genetically engineered vegetation had taken root, spreading carpets of dark green and red across the dusty plains. The hegemony, Its crimes on Gehenna, exposed by data logs recovered from the prison, had collapsed under the weight of its own corruption. The orbital colony, saved from annihilation, now governed itself, a beacon of independence. Lyra stood on a ridge overlooking a quiet valley. She was not alone. Behind her were others of her kind, their luminous forms shimmering in the soft light of the new atmosphere. They had returned, drawn back to a world that was now safe, a home they had thought lost forever. She was their leader, their guide. She walked to the edge of the ridge. Before her stood a simple monument. It was not built, but grown. A single, flawless crystal spire that rose from the ground, its facets capturing and refracting the light of the gas giant above. It marked the sealed entrance to the old core chamber. She reached out and placed her hand on the cool, smooth surface of the crystal. For a long moment, she stood in silence, her eyes closed. Then, a soft, gentle light began to pulse from deep within the rock of the moon itself. It was a slow, steady rhythm, like a contented heartbeat. It was a light of quiet consciousness, of eternal vigilance. It was Kalen. He was the silent guardian, the heart of the world's newfound peace. His sacrifice was not forgotten. It was felt in the stability of the ground, in the clarity of the air, in the quiet hum of a world at peace. His identity was gone, subsumed into a purpose far greater than himself. He had traded his life not for a prisoner, but for a world. And in his silent, eternal watch, he had finally found his meaning. Lyra felt his acknowledgement, a wave of serene contentment that flowed through the very stone she touched. She kept her hand there for a long time, a silent communion with the man who had become a world, her friend, the reluctant savior of Gehenna. The peace he had bought was real, and it endured.